My name is Ryan Dumas, and I am a biologist here, and my specialty is working with reptiles and amphibians. So for the past it's about 15 years I've been working with that type of animal, and I've had a little bit of experience with everything else. Typically there's only two types of snake scales. You have keeled and smooth scales. Smooth scales are pretty much how they sound. They're very smooth scales and they align together very well. And keeled scales are more like they have a keel down the middle of their scale, and it's like the keel of a boat. Underneath a boat, there's usually, on a lot of boats, there's a keel underneath that helps keep stability, and that's where they get the name for the scales. The main purpose of a scale is to help retain water and moisture and prevent water loss and prevent dehydration and things like that. But when you feel a snake that has keeled scales, it's very, very obvious. They feel a little rougher, whereas holding a smooth-scaled animal is much different. If you look at a snake, especially a smooth-scaled snake, some of them are very glossy and they almost have a wet look. Anytime I've had a snake out for someone to see, that's one of the first things that I kind of get them over. It's like, it's not slimy, it's not even cold, even though they're cold-blooded. I mean, the animal's usually like in the 80 to 90 degrees, and it's weird that it's warm and feels more like a basketball than anything slimy. Because they're ectotherms, they rely on the environment to regulate their body temperature, which is very important to reproduction and metabolic rates and digestion and other physiological traits. So that you want them to be in a warmer area. The warmer it is, the better, the higher your metabolism is going to be, the more you're going to process those foods. So we are warm-blooded, so we have to eat constantly because that energy that we're taking in fuels our body to maintain 98.6 degrees, and that's very energetically costly. And that's something that snakes don't have to do. They don't have to invest any of their food energy into regulating their body temperature because that's what the environment's doing. So they're very adaptive, and they have paired organs. A lot of them, kidneys, are the same as ours, but the main difference is in lungs. Usually there's only one functional lung in snakes. There's a lot of theories of what the other lung is for. Some theories, the most prevalent theory right now is that the other lung can take air, but they use it to hold warm air to help maintain the body temperature a little longer. But because of that, snakes are very susceptible to respiratory infection, which is basically pneumonia, an upper respiratory infection. They smell the Jacobson's organ, which is located in the roof of their mouth, and their tongue doesn't actually smell. Their tongue is actually picking up particles, so they stick their tongue out and they move it around and flick it, and that's just picking up scent particles in the air. When they pull it back into their mouth, they stick that into their Jacobson's organ, and it analyzes those particles and tells them what they're smelling. And that's how they kind of smell things. Well, snakes don't have eyelids, so the scales over their eyes are a protection. And as they grow, that scale over their eyes needs to grow as well, or else it would constrict their eyes. So that when a snake sheds, you see the eye cap, which is the scale that sheds off with it. And some snakes have really good eyesight and some don't. It's very particular to the type of animal you're looking at. When snakes hatch or are born, they're essentially miniature versions of the adults. Most don't go through many life changes. They just grow bigger. Some snakes lay eggs and it takes a few years. Most snakes can't breed until they're 3 or 4 years old, reach a certain size, and they start developing follicles, and that's an important life stage. So they either lay eggs or they keep their eggs inside of them in it's like a thin membranous shell, and then they hatch out live young. Most boas, vipers, all are live young. So they gestate inside the animal, basically incubate the eggs inside them, and when it's time, they just kind of lay babies. Not all snakes are venomous. A venomous snake, that teeth is a delivery mechanism for their venom, which is just a specialized protein that helps some digest animals and some paralyze animals so they can eat them. But most snakes do have a lot of teeth, and those are small, recurved teeth, and they're mainly used for hanging on to things. In a constricting snake, that's going to get that initial grab. The snake can't get away, and then it'll coil around it. Some snakes, like an eastern indigo, actually are an overpowering type of eater. They don't really constrict at all, and they just grab something and start eating it. So they need those specialized locking in teeth to keep their prey so they can eat it. Well, antivenom, I think there's a misnomer about antivenom. A lot of people think that antivenom is the cure. You get bit by a snake, get the antivenom, you're done. Antivenom is a last case scenario. It's a last minute scenario. A lot of people go into anaphylactic shock once they get it. It's definitely not a cure-all. It's very expensive to make. Most antivenoms aren't even an FDA-approved drug. They're all experimental. There is one FDA-approved antivenom, and it is manufactured for the United States, called There's two names for it. It's called Crofab and Bioclone, and those are for North American pit vipers. Most hospitals have those in stock, and that is an FDA-approved drug. Antivenom is typically made by injecting horses with small amounts of venom, and then extracting their blood and isolating the antibodies produced by that, and then they make the antivenom from that. You name it, they probably eat it. Some things eat earthworms and crickets and small other invertebrates, whereas some eat gazelle and deer, things like that. Generally anything with the name king in it, king cobra, king snakes, they all employ a lot of cannibalism within their own species as well as other snake species, like California king snakes will eat other California king snakes, but they also eat rattlesnakes, and they seem to be immune to their venom. A lot of python and boa species specialize in warm-blooded prey, a lot of rodents, things like that, and there are fish specialists, water snakes that are around here, love eating frogs and fish and things like that. So I mean, you name it, and snakes have carved out a niche to eat it. Snakes are so different. There are so many snakes that it's very different depending on what snake you're talking to. A Burmese python, an adult, 15-foot Burmese python may only in the wild have to eat twice a year. Smaller snakes, ringneck snakes that you find around here that live in the leaf litter you barely ever see, you eat every at least once a week, if not more. But they have evolved to be able to withstand long periods of time without eating. That's part of being a cold-blooded animal, an ectothermic animal, as they can shut down they can atrophy actually. It was proven in Burmese pythons that they can atrophy their stomach and not use it and completely shut it down and help slow down the use of energy so they don't have to eat anymore. But generally in captivity we feed a snake once every week or once every 2 weeks. As many animals as snakes eat, same things will eat those guys. They're usually a little bigger. A lot of birds of prey, raccoons, bears, other snakes. Basically anything that's big enough to get at jackals. I mean, depending on where you're at, something's going to try and eat it. Mongoose is a classic example. It's a very dangerous snake. A cobra and a mongoose are fast, and most of the time they're immune to some of the venom, and they can handle a king cobra. So it's just it's a cool arms race to see that snakes can have evolved, but still have a lot of other animals to be able to eat those things. Generally, snakes like a slightly drier, warmer environment. I think most of the snakes in the world probably live within a band of maybe 75-degree temperatures. Seems to be pretty ideal for a lot of snakes. But maybe out for 2 hours a day, and that's all basking, so they get energy to go back down unless something falls across. So it's very weird. You see the most as you get closer to the equator. You typically see an increase in species diversity. So you see more snakes there, but there's still a lot of snakes everywhere. It's not cold, or if it is cold, you're most likely not going to see many snakes. A lot of the animals that these snakes eat, rodents, rabbits, they're quick breeders. There's a lot of them, usually a lot of prey. Fish spawn in huge numbers, so there's usually a lot that are available for those guys to eat, and they help keep things in control. I mean, a lot of farmers are starting to turn to having rat snakes instead of cats to eat the mice that are in their barn. Because the cat might be able to eat that one mouse, but that mouse goes into the hole, the cat's kind of done, where the snake goes in there and eats the family. That sounds really tragic, but it's good for us because that's food that the farmer's storing for us. It's not contaminated with mouse or any other kind of mammal. They're a predator, typically not an apex predator, but they are definitely ingrained in that food web of eaten and being eaten, and they're just an integral part. They're good bioindicators, depending what you're looking at. Like a riparian zone around here by the stream, you see a lot of queen snakes, garter snakes, water snakes. You're looking at a most likely pretty healthy environment because those things are eating frogs, which are also good bioindicators, fish, crayfish, and those are also signs of a healthy ecosystem. So seeing those guys, indicates that you're looking at a healthy ecosystem. At some point, they started having either reduced limbs or no limbs. You look at skinks, like a blue-tongued skink, usually have a long fusiform body and very tiny legs, which seems to look like some kind of evolutionary medium between snake and lizard. Copperheads, we have one around the corner, and when they're born, their tail is a bright yellow, and it's a caudal lure. So what they do is they sit in the leaf litter, which they're perfectly camouflaged for, and they'll wiggle just the end of their tail. It's a little bright yellow lure, A lot of mice, a lot of small animals want to eat that tiny little thing, and they nail it as soon as it comes over and they get their food. Other adaptations, you're looking at sea snakes. It's a great adaptation. They actually have lacrimal systems, which they rid their bodies of extra salt because they're in the ocean all the time. And if you look at their tail, it's also flattened out completely, and it's very keeled-like to help them swim around. The Javan file snake has more of a beaded scales all over its skin because it specializes in constricting fish. And normal scales have a very tough time holding on to those things, but these kind of beaded, bumpy scales actually do a really good job of holding tight to the fish long enough for them to constrict and eat it. And it's crazy how many adaptations they have. Go on and on. Currently in zoos, we have a species survival plan, which is known as an SSP, where we determine the genetic importance of animals and we move animals to different facilities according to that so that we can breed them and create and keep a strong captive genetic population. There are many species that are like that. They're just the same as a lot of endangered, like pandas and things like that. Habitat fragmentation is probably the biggest detriment to any wildlife, more than any kind of disease or, I mean, rattlesnake roundups are very common practice in the South, and in my opinion, they're terrible. Basically, they just round up every rattlesnake they can find, hundreds of thousands, and all of them are slaughtered at some point. You cut down on habitat availability, you're cutting down on populations of all animals, not just snakes, but everything they're eating and everything that's eating them. It makes it a lot harder for them to survive and maintain a good population.